David and Albert were the best of friends. They farmed together, shared financial dealings, and had complete trust in each other. When David went on a pilgrimage, he entrusted his home to Albert. Likewise, whenever Albert had to travel, he left his house in David's care. They were neither alike in food habits nor in lifestyle, only in thoughts, and that was the true foundation of their friendship. Their bond had begun back when both were young boys, studying under David's esteemed father, Jonathan. Albert had served their teacher with utmost devotion, scrubbing dishes, washing teacups, and ensuring that his hookah never went out. These acts of service weren't done with any selfish intent, but out of a student's deep respect, something Albert understood well. His father was an old-fashioned man who believed that serving one's teacher was more valuable than education itself. He would say, "A teacher's blessings are everything. Knowledge comes from grace, not mere study." And though Albert never quite received that grace, he found peace in knowing he had left no stone unturned in his pursuit of learning. Perhaps education was simply not in his destiny. On the other hand, Jonathan believed more in discipline than in blessings, and he wielded his cane freely, especially on David. But this blessing had shaped David into a sharp and influential man. In his town and the surrounding villages, no legal transaction, be it a deed or a mortgage, was considered valid unless written by David. Even the court clerks hesitated to draft documents without his approval. The local postman, constable, and revenue officer all relied on his guidance. If Albert had gained respect through wealth, then David had secured his honor through knowledge. David had an elderly widowed aunt who owned a small piece of land. Being alone in the world, she had no heir. David, with sweet words and grand promises, convinced her to transfer the property to his name. Until the gift deed was officially registered, she was treated like royalty, served delicious meals, and spoken to with the utmost care. But the moment the legal papers were finalized, the warmth disappeared. David's wife, Fatima, changed her treatment overnight. The rich meals turned bland, and soon the portions of curry grew smaller while the dry bread remained the same. "What does an old woman need all this for anyway?" she would grumble. "She gave us a mere 2 acres of land, and now she expects a feast every day? If we had saved all the money we've spent on her food, we could have bought an entire village by now." For some time, the old woman endured in silence, but when the neglect became unbearable, she finally confronted David. "My son, I can't live like this anymore. Give me some money so I can cook my own meals," she pleaded. David, feigning innocence, replied, "Do you think money grows on trees?" The old woman flared up. "So what now? Should I starve?" David sighed dramatically. "Of course not. Drink my blood if you must. Did anyone think you'd live forever?" The old woman couldn't bear to hear such words. Enraged and humiliated, she declared, "I will take this to the village council." David chuckled, a victorious, knowing chuckle, like a hunter watching his prey walk into a trap. Yes, go ahead. Let's settle this once and for all. Even I don't want this daily trouble." He had no fear of the council's decision. Who in the village wasn't indebted to him? Who dared to go against him? Who had the courage to defy his influence? The heavens weren't going to send angels to hold court. The villagers themselves would decide, and David was confident in their loyalty. For days, the old woman wandered from village to village, leaning on her walking stick, seeking justice. Her back was bent with age, each step a struggle, but she wouldn't give up. David, secure in his power, didn't need to plead for support. She wept before the villagers, but no one came to her aid. Some simply nodded and walked away. Others mocked her, saying, "Look at this old woman, 1 foot in the grave, yet she can't let go of land and money. Just eat what you get, drink some water, and pray for your afterlife." The cruelest ones laughed at her appearance, her hunched back, toothless mouth, shaking hands, and failing hearing. She was nothing more than an amusement to them. Very few kind souls listened to her pleas with compassion. After countless rejections, she finally arrived at Albert's doorstep. She planted her staff into the ground, caught her breath, and said, "My son, please, at least you must come to my council hearing." Albert, indifferent, replied, "What do you need me for?" "The entire village will be there." The old woman, panting, said, "I have begged for justice in every village. Who knows who will show up? Even great saints rise to help those in distress. Won't anyone hear my cry?" Albert hesitated. "I'll come," he said at last, "but I won't speak." The old woman was puzzled. "Why not, my son?" Albert, wanting to avoid trouble, replied, "It's just not my way. David is my old friend. I don't want to ruin that." The old woman struck where it hurt. "So, my son, will you let fear silence the truth? Will you betray justice to protect a friendship? A guilty conscience can sleep through theft, but jolts awake at an open challenge." Albert couldn't answer. Could he really bring himself to say no to truth? In the evening, the village council gathered under a large tree. A mat was spread out and a hookah was arranged, all courtesy of David. He himself sat a little distance away, sharing the hookah with Albert. Whenever someone arrived, he would greet them with a subdued nod. However, it was surprising that only those influential individuals attended who had no reason to fear his disapproval. Many others treated the meeting like a social gathering, assembling in large groups. Once the council was fully seated, the old woman addressed the gathering. Respected elders, 3 years ago, I transferred all my property to my nephew David. You all must know him well. He had promised to provide me with food and clothing for life. For the first year or so, I managed to survive, tolerating all hardships. But now I can no longer bear this endless suffering. I am denied even basic meals. I am a helpless widow. I cannot go to the courts or the police station. Who else can I turn to except you? Whatever decision you make, I will accept. If you find me in the wrong, slap me across the face. But if David is at fault, then make him understand why he is taking the curse of a helpless woman upon himself. Ramdan Mishra spoke up. David, decide now whom you want as judges. David scanned the crowd and found himself surrounded by adversaries. With a bold tone, he declared, Aunt, choose whomever you want as judges. I have no objections. The old woman raised her voice. Then why don't you name them yourself, my son? David shot her an angry glare. Don't make me say things I shouldn't. Choose whomever you wish. Sensing his hesitation, the old woman said, Son, fear God. No one will sell their conscience for me. Among these honorable men, do you think they are all your enemies? Let them be, but will you accept Albert? David felt a surge of joy, but controlled himself and said, Albert is fine. To me, Ramdan Mishra and Albert are the same. None of them are my enemies. Albert grew uneasy. He did not want to get entangled in this matter. With hesitation, he said, Old mother, you know David and I are close friends. The old woman replied, Son, no one sells their faith for friendship. A judge's word is God's word. Whatever a judge speaks comes from the Almighty. Albert had no choice but to accept. He was appointed the chief judge. Ramdan Mishra inwardly cursed the old woman. Albert addressed the gathering. David, you and I have been friends for a long time. Whenever needed, you have helped me, and I have also done whatever I could for you. But today we are not friends. This is a matter of justice and faith. The old woman recounted her hardships to the council. Albert then turned to David. You may present your side. David stood up with a show of righteousness and said, Respected elders, I regard Aunt as my own mother and have never neglected her care. Yes, there are occasional disputes between the women of the household, but I am helpless in that regard. It is their nature. However, giving her a monthly allowance is beyond my capacity. You all know the condition of the fields. Whatever the council decides, I will accept. Albert was well versed in legal matters. He began cross-examining David, and each question struck David like a hammer blow. Ramdan Mishra and his companions nodded in approval at the sharp inquiries. David was bewildered. Just moments ago, Albert had been sitting with him, chatting pleasantly. How had he changed so suddenly and turned against him? So much for friendship. Even Ramdan had been better. He wouldn't have known the exact value of the land and its produce. This wretched man had ruined everything. After the questioning ended, Albert delivered his verdict in a firm and commanding tone. David, the council has thoroughly examined this case. The fault lies entirely with you. The fields yield a decent income, and you must arrange a monthly allowance for Aunt. There is no other solution. If you refuse, the property transfer deed will be revoked. David was stunned into silence upon hearing the decision. He turned to his friends and said, So this is friendship in today's world? A man trusts someone, and in return, they slit his throat? This is the way of the world now. If people weren't such traitors, why would our country face so many calamities? Why would plagues and diseases spread? These disasters are punishments for such treachery. However, Ramdan Mishra, Fateh Khan, and Jagu Singh praised the impartial decision. This is true justice. Right is right, and wrong is wrong. Friendship is one thing, but faith and integrity must be upheld. The world stands because of such honest judges. Otherwise, it would have long plunged into ruin. This decision shook the foundations of Albert and David's friendship. A mighty tree had been unable to withstand the wind of truth. They still met, but like warriors in a battlefield, David could never forget his friend's betrayal. The thought of revenge kept him restless. Fortunately for him, the opportunity came soon. The previous year, Albert had bought a fine pair of bulls from the cattle fair. They were of superior breed, and people from surrounding villages came to admire them. A month after the council's decision, one of the bulls died. David turned to his friends and said, This is the punishment for betrayal. A man may endure it, but God sees everything. Albert suspected that David had poisoned the bull. On the other hand, his wife believed someone had cast a spell on it. One day, a heated argument erupted between Albert's wife and David's wife. The women exchanged sharp words using elaborate metaphors and colorful language. The fight escalated until David had to intervene, scolding his wife and pulling her away. Meanwhile, Albert vented his frustration to his men, praising his wife's ability to deliver sharp response. "A bull, what is it worth?" Its pair was searched for, but none could be found. Eventually, it was decided to sell it. In the village, there was a clever merchant named Samuel. He drove a cart. He filled it with goods from the village and took them to the market. From the market, he brought back oil and salt and sold them in the village. Samuel was intrigued by the bull. He thought, if I take it, I'll get 3 loads a day without needing any begging. Otherwise, I'll only get 1 load at a time. He examined the bull, made it run in the cart, and agreed to a 1-month payment for the price. David, too, was in need and didn't mind taking a loss. Samuel got the new bull, and he stretched his legs. Every day, he loaded 3 or 4 carts without worrying about food or water. He just cared about the loads. He took the bull to the market, where he fed it some dry straw. The poor animal didn't even get a chance to catch its breath before being yoked again. When the bull was with Samuel, life seemed easy. It got a regular meal, clean water, and sometimes even the taste of ghee along with fresh lentils and hay. In the evening, a man would come to groom it, scratching, cleaning, and comforting it. But where were the comforts the bull had once known? Now it was working day and night. Within a month, the poor creature had lost all its strength. Samuel's cart made the bull's legs weak. It was difficult for the animal to take even 1 step. Its bones had started to show, but it was a strong animal and couldn't give up. One day, after Samuel loaded 2 heavy bags of grain into the cart, the poor bull, exhausted from the long day, struggled to lift its legs. Samuel started whipping it mercilessly. The bull pushed forward with all its might. After running a little distance, it tried to rest. But Samuel was in a hurry to get home, and he whipped the bull again without mercy. The poor animal mustered one last effort, but its strength was gone. It fell to the ground and couldn't get up again. Samuel beat it furiously, pulling its legs, shoving it, and even sticking a hook in its nostrils. But it was all in vain. Samuel was left wondering what to do. He looked around, but there was no one nearby to help. No other village in sight. In his rage, Samuel whipped the bull again. "You should have died at home, not halfway on the road. Now who's going to pull this cart?" He had a lot of sugar and ghee bags and several $100s tied to their waists, but he couldn't leave the cart. He lay down on it and decided to stay awake all night. He smoked his hookah, sang songs, and smoked some more, trying to pass the time. But by dawn, he realized that his money pouch was missing, along with several cans of oil. He searched frantically, hitting his head in frustration. By morning, he returned home in despair. When Samuel's wife, Martha, heard about the tragic incident, she beat her chest in grief. She cried bitterly and then began cursing Samuel. "You fool, you gave me this cursed bull, and now all our savings are gone." Months passed, and whenever Albert asked for the bull's price, Martha and Samuel would angrily shout, "All of our savings are gone. We are penniless. And you still have the nerve to ask for money for that dead, cursed bull? We were cheated out of everything. You want to get paid for that useless bull? Go wash your face in the pond before even thinking about asking for money." They were furious, but Samuel wasn't willing to let go of the money. After a few months, the situation escalated, and a heated argument broke out between Samuel and Albert. The village elders intervened, advising both parties to resolve the matter through mediation rather than through further conflict. Samuel reluctantly agreed, and the village held a panchayat council. On the 3rd day, under the shade of a tree, the panchayat convened. The matter at hand, whether the bull had rightful ownership of the pea fields or not. When the panchayat assembled, Ramdan Misra asked, "Why delay? Albert, who will you appoint as panch members?" Albert humbly replied, "Let Samuel select the members." Samuel stood and said firmly, "You can choose my name for David." Albert's heart sank. Sensing this, Ramdan Misra asked, "Albert, do you have any objection?" Albert, disheartened, replied, "No, I have no objection." 4 more names were suggested, and Albert carefully picked members. Only the head panch remained. Samuel's relative, Godar Shah, asked, "Samuel, who will be the head panch?" Samuel proudly declared, "David will be our head panch." Ramdan Misra asked again, "Albert, any objection?" Albert, resigned, said, "No, I have no objection." Listeners, responsibility is often a strong corrective to our narrow-mindedness, a guiding force even in our most misguided moments. A journalist, sitting comfortably in his corner, criticizes the council with unflinching boldness and freedom, but there are times when he too is part of that very council. The moment he steps into that circle, a calm dignity emerges in his words. This is the feeling of responsibility. A young scholar is carefree in his youth. His parents look at him with disappointed eyes, considering him a disgrace to the family. But within a few days after losing the protection of his parents, the same carefree youth, once considered a disgrace, becomes cautious and self-aware. This is the realization of responsibility. It broadens our vision but restricts our words. David too became aware of his enormous responsibility. He thought, I am now sitting in a position of justice. My words now hold the authority of God's will, and my personal desires should have no influence on this decision. Any deviation from truth and justice would condemn me in both this world and the next. Samuel must pay the full price for the bull, as it was healthy when received. If he had paid then, he wouldn't be demanding it back now. Ramdan Mizra added, there should be compensation for the damage Samuel caused. David replied, that's irrelevant. Concessions depend on Albert's generosity. Overjoyed, Albert stood, raising his hands, shouting, victory to the Panchayat. His voice echoed as if the stars themselves were celebrating. An hour later, David came to Albert and embraced him, saying, brother, ever since you conducted my Panchayat, I considered you my enemy. But today I have learned that when you sit on the throne of justice, there is no place for friendship or enmity. Only justice remains. This is the grace of God. Today I am certain that the Panchayat's decision is the will of God. Albert began to weep. His heart was clear. The withered tree of friendship had blossomed again, and he stood not on the soil of deception, but on the ground of truth and justice.